Well, hello there. Hope you're doing great. In today's video, I'm going to walk through this build. It's an inn I made for my tabletop games. Most of the materials I used, like card, coffee stir sticks, and matchsticks, should be easy to source. And while I have used XPS foam for the bricks, I'll give you a couple of alternatives if that isn't your thing. As a reference, I used this 1633 engraving from Jacques Calot's Miseries and Misfortunes of War. When I was writing the Four Horsemen, I used several engravings from the set, so transferring this to a tabletop piece sounded like fun. Plus, it felt right to give them a shout-out. I only used this as a starting point, it was never meant to be an exact representation. For one thing, we can only see two walls here, so we'll have to make the other two up anyway. One thing I could tell I needed to change was up on this side, where the posts are embedded in the ground. If you put your buildings on bases, you can do this, but since I don't, I needed a little platform there to support them so they don't get snapped off. From the picture, it looks like there's a gateway back, which probably means there's a yard. It could even connect to the building behind it. That is a bit larger than I like to have individual buildings, so I just focused on the main building. We can always build more walls separately. The overhang on the left-hand side goes some way, but since the support is only drawn on one side here, it made me think that it doesn't go the length of the building. I decided to put a split in the roof around halfway because I find buildings that are not perfectly rectangular look more interesting. I figured there would be a door there too, because there wouldn't be much point to have an overhang otherwise. Once I had decided on these points, I made myself some templates. You can find these on my Patreon for absolutely free. You don't need to pay a thing or even have an account, just go there and download them. Some of the parts are slightly different from what you are seeing on your screen right now because I went back and tweaked them after my build to make them a bit easier to put together. I'm going to gloss over the assembly of these card parts in this video because it is fairly straightforward and the fun bit is decorating the frame. But if you want to see how I build these, you can see the whole process in gory detail in my barn video. Now let me show you a terrible mistake I made. Here I am drawing where I wanted the doors and windows to go. Don't do this. Make yourself a template with the size of the doors and windows you want and use that. It's much easier because then they will all be the same size and you won't need to make different sized doors for each specific opening. This is something I'll try to keep in mind in future builds. The wall texture was done using individual bricks. I cut mine on the hot wire cutter, a 10x5x5mm, but you can make your own using a knife and some foam board. Or buy them ready-made. You can also cut them from egg cartons, though that will give you less variety in depth. I like to start by building up the corners, alternating between two walls till the whole corner is set up. By the time you finish one corner, the previous one should be dry, so it lets you turn the building around to keep working. You can also do stuff like these stairs right now. Next, I did the door and window frames. These are strips of foam 5x5mm in cross-section. A good squeeze of PVA lets you slide these around till you have them in place. The tops of the rounded windows work a bit differently. You'll need to cut some wedge shapes for these and move them in place. A tongue depressor helps as you can use that to align the pieces along a curve. Once you get to the bottom of the arch, you can continue using regular bricks and a long piece for the windowsill. After that, it's just a case of putting down a bead of glue and building up the walls brick by brick. You can vary the pattern however you like, but in general try not to squeeze them together. Try to leave a little gap between each brick and its neighbors. When you get to the top of the wall, keep bricking so that you overshoot the edge of the roof. We'll trim this later, and it's a lot faster than cutting and laying bricks to the edge. We'll need to slot a beam in the sides of the eave later, so I used a fireplace matchstick as a spacer to lay down a couple of rows. Just make sure you remove it before the glue sets. I left the glue to set overnight, then trim the edges of the roof. The easiest way to do this is to register a blade against the roof and slide it down. Some bricks might get pulled off, but that's okay, just glue them back in place. To make a chimney, I started by making a small card box and glued more bricks to it. On the bottom side, I overshot the edge of my box and then trimmed it down to match the angle of the roof before I glued it on. I wanted all of the textures, so I got a ball of aluminum foil and pushed it around the surface of the bricks to indent the foam. This gives a great rending pattern. You can be quite rough with it, but be careful with things like the chimney. Support it with your hands when you push so you don't tear it off. The stonework was almost done now. I wanted to have some beams sticking out the side for roof supports, so I cut a few square holes near the top of the wall to give me spaces to plug them in later. I usually use spray primers and varnishes on my models, so the foam needs protection from the propellants in the can. PVA works well for this, and I like to mix it up with black paint so I have an easy way of telling if I missed anything. This may not go everywhere, but usually spaces between the bricks already have enough glue on them to keep them safe. Just remember to do the bottom edges too. The shingles are pieces of thin cardstock, 15 by 5mm. I like to put down a thick bead of glue, set down a row, and then work my way up row by row. You'll need to offset them a little and occasionally nudge them into place. Take your time. The glue will give you plenty of working time. Once you get to the top from both sides, you can put in a capping strip. This is just a row of double-length shingles creased down the middle. Cardstock can fray, so I like to wet down the shingles with some water and a couple of drops of surgical spirit, and then brush them over with some heavily diluted PVA glue. This can take a while to dry, but it gives them a nice protective layer. I left it to dry and gave everything a few blasts with a black spray primer. I wanted a limestone color for the stone, so I started with an overbrush of carnation pink mixed with a tiny amount of rose sienna. Don't worry too much about the coverage. If you have a few patches that still look greyish, that's even better for the finished effect. Let that dry and hit everything with a rose sienna wash. It does not need to go on smooth, so have fun and go as sloppy as you like. Then it's time for the secret sauce. Mix up some polyfiller and splooge it on the walls, and then use a wet brush and your fingers to work it into the gaps of the bricks and all over the wall. Here you can see that I used way too much, but that's okay, you can just brush off the excess. Try to keep the doorways and window openings clear, as clumps of filler will make it harder to glue in the doors and windows. In my case, I scraped them with a sculpting tool when I got any filler in there. When you're working on the chimney, you'll probably get some filler on the shingles. Don't worry, just use a wet brush to swab it up. Some of it will be left on the roof, but as long as there aren't any thick clumps, the paint will cover it right up. By the time the filler is dry, you should see some color variation in the surface. Some bricks will be white, some bricks will have paint show through, and some bricks will have been stripped down to the primer. This gives you a great undertone for your dry brush, so get some rose sienna and go to town on the walls. Go ahead, beat the devil out of it. After a few layers, this will be looking pretty clean, but we can do better. Load up your dry brush with black and hit the lower courses and the steps. This will create a great layer of dirt, and keep layering this as long as you like. To round this off, you can also stipple some black or dye grey on the chimney. Now, I think my brush was too wet here, so the effect is a bit more diffuse than I wanted it to be, but it's not too far off. Once you're happy with the stone, painting up the shingles is really quick. I base coated mine with a black-blue mix, giving them a couple of layers, and made sure to cover any areas that were smudged with the filler. After that, a quick grey dry brush will make them pop. I used a piece of card to cover the chimney while I did this, but since it's grey, it's not the end of the world if you get some paint on it. At this point, I added in the doors and windows. I lost some footage here, but they're just coffee stair sticks glued to a piece of card, washed black and dry brushed. The posts and the beams holding up the eave are all fireplace mesh sticks, also painted black and dry brushed grey. Just cut them to match the angle of the roof and slide them into the slots we left for them earlier. At this point, I also glued 1 cm long piece of matchstick in the holes along the roof, so we have the ends of the beam sticking out. The cross beam is just another fireplace matchstick. Make sure it's positioned above the top level of the stairs if you are using those. The posts might be a tight fit, but the materials are flexible enough that you can use some gentle pressure to force them apart without breaking, while you get the post in place. At this stage, the PVA acts as a lubricant, and the extra pressure is good as the whole thing acts as its own clamp. Just please don't take this as general advice. PVA should not be used as a lubricant in most situations. The supports are just more mesh sticks cut with a 45-degree angle and glued into place. Well, look at Mr. Fancy Pants here trying to be posh and using tweezers. You can see how well that worked out. Never mind that, fingers work just fine for this. An inn needs a sign, so I made one using 3 pieces of coffee stair stick glued at the edges, and 2 matchsticks for the signpost. Like all the other wooden parts, these were washed black and dry brushed grey. To make the signpost, I cut out one of the matchsticks at a 45-degree angle and glued it to the other stick, making sure to leave space for the sign. Once the glue set, I lined the end of the horizontal piece up with one of the lines on my cutting mat, and cut the angled piece along the same line. This leaves the 2 ends in line with each other, so it's easier to glue them to the building. I used 2 small dots of PVA on the connection points to glue the signpost to the post. While you're doing this, check your work from multiple angles to make sure it's on straight. The bond isn't super strong, but that's intentional. I'm certain that this will get knocked off at some point, and I'm hoping that the tiny amount of glue means that it will snap off cleanly rather than taking a chunk of the post out with it. So that should be an easy repair. I wanted to paint something on the sign, so I prepared it by stippling it with a few layers of Rosian and Carnation Pink, working around in circles and focusing mostly on the center. My thinking was that this would have been painted a solid color but got worn off with time. At this point, Dean still had no name, so I asked some friends for suggestions. There were several good ones, but in the end, Damona came up with the Ugly Mug. It's a good name, and more importantly, I could freehand a mug fairly easily. Before putting more paint on the sign, I sketched out what I thought the sign should look like, then made smaller versions. What you're looking for here is to minimize the number of lines that you need to draw. I was planning to use my technical pens to do this, but I have no idea where I put them, so I ended up using a brush instead. If you do this, work slowly and rotate the sign so that it favors your hand. You want to be able to pull the brush towards you as often as possible. I used undiluted paint for this, so it wouldn't run. Once the outline was complete, I colored it in with blue, and then used a slightly darker blue to shade some parts. And of course I did this twice, because both sides of the sign are visible. If this sounds like too much work, you can of course use a decal or just print the sign on some paper and glue it on. You do you. To finish off, I glued on the sign. Again, check from multiple angles to make sure it's aligned with the post. And with that, we're done. Welcome to the Ugly Mug Inn. The stairs aren't code compliant, but that's okay, the food isn't either. I'm especially happy with how the stone turned out. Though I want to look into other roofing methods as the roof is looking a bit plain compared to the rest of the build. Still, this inn will be a good core for a set of buildings, so I'll be making a few different ones soon. Luckily, there are plenty of engravings in that set to use for reference. While I sort that out, if you want to see what else you can build with a similar-ish technique, check out this gaming board here. Bye!